Good morning. So, on this 50th anniversary year of the lunar landing, we have been taking some time to look at the challenges and achievements of this historic milestone and what it may offer us as we consider our own faith journeys as individuals and a collective body. This morning, we're continuing the Moonshot series with an exploration into the hard work that is required and the failures that are inevitable in the attempt to do big things. There are people here this morning like myself who were too young or not alive to remember the space race of the 1960s, and others here who were still in the early stages of their lives when this was all happening. But either way, it's hard to overstate how incredibly ambitious and challenging it was to consider landing a person on the moon when it was proposed by President Kennedy to Congress in May of 1961. Many perceived this rhetoric as a reaction to the success of the Soviet Union, who had beaten the U.S. into space with the Sputnik satellite a few years earlier, and recently, just a few weeks before, had placed the first person into space, a Russian cosmonaut, Yuri Gagarin. This announcement was also coming on the heels of the embarrassing Bay of Pigs fiasco, and so at the time, many believed that such a declaration about sending a person to the moon was more bluster than reality. And it's easy for us to sit here 50 years later and believe that, of course, going to the moon was always an inevitability. But we should keep in mind that in 1961, it had only been a little more than just 40 years since humans had first figured out how to fly across the Atlantic Ocean with a propeller airplane. And now, sending someone to the moon in just 9 years was understood to be impossible. And yet, in 1969, the impossible was done. The goal was achieved because it was prioritized with billions of dollars and millions of hours of work that were obsessively poured into this goal. There are very convincing arguments questioning the merits of spending that much money and effort on a moon landing during a time of great poverty and inequality in the United States. And it's a valuable question to ask what else could have perhaps been achieved with the same focus and effort was applied elsewhere. And while I cannot say if such a mission was pleasing to God, it is clear that sending a man to the moon was captivating enough to harness the willpower and the energy of the people required to make it happen, because it did. If nothing else, it is a testament to the capacities and the abilities of the God-given talents that humanity possesses when it sets out to achieve a goal. It stands as a reminder to us what we are able to achieve. It is difficult to fathom the entire industry and systems that had been developed and created around this project in order to make the mission successful. Incredible effort was put forward, unwavering commitment and desire. Achievements were built on the backs of predecessors and many, many failures. Going to the moon didn't just happen. It was grinded out every single step of the way. And that brings us to the scripture for this morning. I've chosen the paraphrase of the message here because I think it fits into the theme today. It's particularly relevant. This is Hebrews 12, verses 1 to 3. Do you see what this means? All these pioneers who blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on. It means we'd better get on with it. Strip down, start running, and never quit. No extra spiritual fat, no parasitic sins. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it. Because he never lost sight of where he was headed, that exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever. And now he's there in the place of honor, right alongside God. When you find yourself flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item. That long litany of hostility he plowed through. That will shoot adrenaline into your souls. That will shoot adrenaline into your souls. Don't we want some of that, right? Shoot some adrenaline into our souls. What does that for you? What helps you create joy and excitement in your faith journey? Or is your faith and desire to follow Jesus like that? Or has it become so unchallenging that it has become almost boring? It has become too safe that it feels stale and lifeless. Does your faith feel like it has adrenaline pumped into it? We see here that when you find yourselves flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item, that long litany of hostility he plowed through. In these verses from Hebrews, the author is imploring us as Christians to press on, to work hard, accept the challenges and sacrifices that are required with following Jesus, and to also look back on the whole story. In the previous chapter, in chapter 11, there is a litany of biblical heroes: Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses. The list goes on, recording their successes as well as their challenges and failures. They are the cloud of witnesses that are referenced in Hebrews 12, or in the Message version that we read, pioneers who blazed the way. In the previous chapter in Hebrews, chapter 11, verses 13 to 16, again here from the Message, it says, "Each one of these people of faith died not yet having in hand what was promised, but still believing." How did they do it? They saw it way off in the distance, waved their greeting, and accepted the fact that they were transients in this world. People who live this way make it plain that they are looking for their future, their true home. If they were homesick for the old country, they could have gone back anytime they wanted, but they were after a far better country than that, heaven country. What is this heaven country that God is calling us towards? This is not simply about a place where we go after we die, but the world that lies before us here on earth. What moonshots will get us there? What work will need to be done? What sacrifices will be required of us? What trials and challenges will we encounter along the way? This journey will not happen by accident. It will require the same hard work and dedication that we have seen from this cloud of witnesses that came before us. We can look to the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo space missions as examples of what it takes to press on and move forward towards a difficult goal. Before stepping onto a rocket, astronauts were put through an almost unimaginable number of test scenarios and practice runs that covered just about every possible malfunction or problem that they could possibly face. Thousands of people had worked to cobble together redundancies and fail-safes that were repeatedly tested and stressed and retested over and over and over again. They were able to learn through trial and error, able to learn through mistakes and failures. We too are called to live our lives as Christians in such a way that we are constantly honing and refining our faith, learning from our interactions with one another, showing love and kindness in situations where we are unsure of how things will turn out. It is interesting that we use the term practice when we discuss what we do with our faith. We practice our faith. We put into action, and sometimes it does not seem to work out the way that we imagined it would. But the more we seek to press on, the more we are willing to stretch ourselves and grow in the ways of Jesus, the better prepared we will be for our future difficult situations that come our way. The more we strive to run with perseverance and fix our eyes on Jesus, as Hebrews says, with all of the little things, the more we will be able, the better fit we will be to handle the big things. In April of 1970, Apollo 13 set out for a lunar landing, as the previous two missions had successfully done. Unfortunately, as they were approaching the moon, there was a malfunction that caused an oxygen tank to explode. Some of you might remember this. Very quick, and the rest of us probably saw Apollo 13, so we might have an idea of what this was like. Very quickly, this became a very serious problem that threatened the lives of the 3 astronauts that were on board. Due to the extensive amount of training and practice, the astronauts and ground control in Houston were able to troubleshoot a number of possible issues. But even with all their preparation, they were still required to think outside the box and generate solutions that had not been previously conceived. Even when faced with unforeseen challenges, the type and amount of training that they had gone through prepared them for handling that new challenge. Knowing that they were equipped and prepared made it possible for them to operate under an ethos that failure is not an option. As individuals, as a congregation, and as a people of God, we seek to confront the many challenges that face humanity and if we seek to achieve any kind of moonshot success, we must be ready to do the hard work. We must be willing to practice and prepare our hearts and minds for compassion towards those with whom we disagree, for perseverance when situations are difficult, for creativity and openness to confront new challenges, and wisdom to discern a path forward. It can begin with the simplest of things, like daily disciplines of prayer and devotions, biting our tongues when provoked, offering and extending forgiveness, demonstrating patience, or showing abundant kindness. There's a popular saying that offers some insight into how smaller intentional acts and practices influence our broader behavior and decision-making. And that's, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. If we seek to exemplify Christ-like living in sacrifice, humility, love, and compassion, we must be willing to suffer those acts in our everyday lives. And while it may be true that there is often struggle and pain that comes along with being faithful to the way of Jesus, it is important to recognize that this does not require us to live a joyless and miserable existence. As so many in this congregation have discovered through a lifelong commitment of service, there is great joy that comes with service and sacrifice to others. I have often come to discover that God seems to have created the framework of the universe in such a way that serving God, even through sacrificial acts, often comes with its own rewards. Many of us know this deeply, that our greatest joys and memories often come from experiences uniquely tied to those in following God's call to love one another or dwelling in Christ-like communities and situations, even when it isn't easy. Sometimes this requires trying something new or even risking failure. As a church and as individuals, we are faced with opportunities to try and explore new things together. Perhaps you have been hesitant to participate in a Sunday school class on Sunday morning. Maybe there is an opportunity for you to join a group like our women's Bible study group, men's breakfast, the lunch bunch. You could volunteer in children's Sunday school program or VBS, join the choir, or help with technology on a Sunday morning. As a church, we are moving forward together on a journey with our building project and will also be taking a risk with the start of a new small groups program. We may continue to cultivate a posture of being bold. We must continue to cultivate a posture of being bold in our faith if we seek to genuinely follow Jesus. Last week when I was out leading children's church, we spent some time talking about some potential moonshot ideas that seemed impossible, but would be in line with how God calls us to live and make this world a better place. Some of the ideas that the children generated included stopping all wars between countries and nations, creating a machine that turned all trash or waste into food or usable goods for people who are hungry or don't have belongings, getting rid of weapons, stopping all people from smoking, and committing to not letting any more plants and animals go extinct. They had some creative ideas and some real hope for our future. Now, I must admit that when I consider the current state of affairs in our nation and around the world, the anger, the divisiveness, the embrace of bias, the gleeful acceptance of combativeness, along with all the negative trend lines associated with climate change and overconsumption, it's easy for me to slump into pessimism. But change is rarely inspired by pessimism. Some moonshots might be forged in fear, but they are only achieved through hope. The story of Jesus, of Moses, of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, of Paul, of Alexander Mack, the story of many of our own relatives and predecessors, our ancestors, the past members of this very congregation, other churches, even other faiths. Any number of these cloud of witnesses that have come before us, all of their stories contain hope. Perhaps not achieved in their own lifetimes, but passed forward as a gift, as an opportunity for us to take the reins, to dream new dreams, achieve new goals, until we pass that baton on ourselves. These things do not happen on their own. They require us to press forward, to run the race, and to make our faithfulness in the way of Jesus a priority in our lives. Because when we take our eye off the prize or change our focus, opportunities and achievements can easily slip away and lose momentum. On the night of Neil Armstrong's moon landing, people went to sleep and dreamed of moon bases and going to Mars. No one would have believed you if you told them that by 2020, almost 50 years later, no one would have been back on the moon after the Apollo missions. Now, given the myriad of social and economic problems facing Americans, I'm not suggesting that we should have continued to commit to the space program in the same way that we did in the 60s, but it is amazing to consider the drastic change that comes when you adjust priorities. One aspect of success is that it recalibrates what we understand to be exceptional or special. While the Apollo 12 mission was just as technically challenging and impressive as Apollo 11, hardly anyone knows that Pete Conrad and Alan Bean walked on the moon just a few months after Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. I had to look those names up. I'm sure for most of you they are not common household names. But another thing about progress is that it raises the bar. It forces one to reimagine what is possible. It pushes us forward towards better circumstances and often higher standards of justice. It is what makes us look back on history and even sometimes at Scripture and recoil at the oppression that was once commonly accepted. This progress, the many seemingly impossible moonshots achieved, require constant effort in which God is always calling us forward towards bigger and better things, even things that seem unachievable. One of the reasons that the moonshot was successful was because it was just so ambitious. It captivated imagination because it was, now pardon the pun, otherworldly. But isn't that also what we are called to as Christians? Called to be in this world, but not of this world? Perhaps ambition is part of the reason for the success of our faith as well. Its idealism, its optimism, and its commitment to achieve what seems impossible. I know within the Church of the Brethren, I grew up hearing the phrase, another way of living. This is a challenge to all of us, not to be conformed by this world, but to follow our call to love God and love one another, even when, especially when, it is difficult. Not only do we do this on Sunday mornings, but we are called to practice our faith all day, every day, so that when we are faced with difficult situations, we can react in the way of Jesus. We prepare in our faith in such a way that when it comes to following Jesus, failure is not an option. I spent this past week directing a youth resident camp at Camp Swatara, and like the children of this church, they too offer me great optimism and hope for the future. Camp for me has always been a place to practice faith, a place to experience Christ-like community, one of those thin places that seem to provide access to God in ways that aren't so easy elsewhere. Perhaps you can think of places or situations like that in your own life. This church is a thin place for many. Given how special camp is to many of these youth, the end of the week often comes with tears and sadness as they contemplate returning back to the real world. The challenge that I offered them at Sacred Campfire, and I offer all of us today, is to remember and recognize that God's love cannot be contained, not by a camp archway, not by walls of a church or any structure. What we experience in loving and safe communities here at church or at camp or in any other number of places is not made possible because of some kind of unique geography. It is our willingness to participate in God's love. The love, respect, and kindness that we experience and practice here, it is needed elsewhere. And when we have an opportunity and an obligation to try and recreate that experience for everyone that we come in contact with. God calls us into the world to do difficult and challenging things. God's way is not the same as the world's way. It isn't easy. It's not a shortcut. We are called to do the hard work, to run the race, to continue the journey, and to do it together so that we might bring about God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And for this task, failure is not an option.